So thanks very much to Karen and David for inviting me. I met them a couple of years ago at one of the story conferences when they were interviewing a number of the speakers, and they really had good questions. And I so enjoyed visiting with them, and then we did another one when my romantic comedy book came out. And once again, you know how sometimes you see interviews and you think, what are you thinking? Why did you ask that? But not the case with them. They always ask wonderful, wonderful questions and get right to what is so helpful for those of us who are creating content. So this evening's topic is Mythic Challenges, Create Stories That Change the World. So I want to know a little bit more about you first so that I can hopefully make some of the commentary more relevant to what you're doing. So let's just go with how many of you are writers? Okay, great. Producers? Directors? Actors? No actors? Or is nobody admitting it? I see. Actually, I taught a group of actors last week who were here from Denmark to learn about Hollywood, showbiz, acting, etc. And that was quite interesting. How many of you have a specific cause that you are behind with some kind of involvement, whether it's equality, social justice, ecology? Anybody got a favorite? Okay. All right. Great.
I thought you were going to share it. I thought you wanted us to share.
And I presume that most of us are here tonight because of 2 to 3 things. We realize we're in a big old mess here on this planet. And we want to do something about it and make positive changes. And there's an interest in mythology and the classic tools of storytelling. And how can we put all those together? A brief little history about Mythic Challenges. Back in 2011, I was at a conference about the future of story and the global challenges that the world is facing. And there's an organization called the Millennium Project, and I believe it's referenced a number of places in the handout. And they, along with the United Nations, identified 15 global challenges that we all face now. And in one of the pages of the handouts, there is a list of those 15. And when you go to their website, you'll find links to all kinds of research and organizations who are dealing specifically with those. Now, for storytellers, the bad news is we've got a lot of problems. The good news is there's a wide range of problems. One of them is international organized crime. So if you're writing a crime or espionage thriller, you could plug right in there. It's a global challenge. It's a big problem. The rich-poor gap. Has everybody bought their Mega Millions ticket? Talk about your rich-poor gap. Let's make another 1%er. Okay? And certainly social justice and women's rights, education, going from MMDs, murderous military dictatorships, or countries ruled by demagogues, into democracies. There's such a wide range of these challenges. So some colleagues and I were at this conference about it here in LA, and my co-founder partner said, "Hey, I've got an idea." And so we just huddled a little bit, and then he stood up and he said, "We've decided to form an organization that helps people who want to address the challenges do it with storytelling." Yay, everybody thought, that's a great idea. Our pilot project was at a high school in Reseda. And they had a very good film communications department. And they had a sister school, a couple of sister schools in Afghanistan. So we designed the class like what you're going to get tonight, but it was real hands-on with the kids because they were just coming into learning about some of these concepts. And each of them chose one of the challenges and then one of the mythic themes to follow. And they learned about the 5 archepaths: warrior, clergy, scientist, magician, and lover, in order to put their characters in one of those categories or another. And then how to use symbolism to tell your stories. So they worked together with their fellow students in Afghanistan through the State Department and, Facebook videos, etc. And they came up with some really, really good programs. One of them's only 2 minutes. Another one I think is about 18 minutes. And these projects that the kids did were out there winning awards. So we saw that it really worked, even with young people, especially with young people, because they have a vested interest in improving the future. So you can go to our website and go to the videos section and see some of theirs. In fact, I would urge you, just for a laugh and to see how effective this can be, watch the one about water, it's not a game, or water, it's not a contest. It's only 2 minutes long. It's really cute, and there are no words spoken in it, but it gets the idea across. Point being, you can use these tools and you can address these problems in any style you want to, in any genre you want to get across your point. So, how many of you have an interest in mythology? That'd be why you're here. Okay. Has anybody got a particular favorite realm of myth, like the Greco-Roman or the Polynesian, or anything in particular? Or is it more generic interest? Okay, that's good. Because what you find when you get into comparative mythology is that, well, let me back up and say, what are myths? Myths are not just the dusty old stories of the Greeks and Romans, nor are myths other people's religion, nor, as a grade schooler once said, a myth is a female moth. You go, no. Myths are the stories that we tell ourselves to explain the world around us and within us. That's it. The stories we tell ourselves to explain the world around us and the world within us. And as a side note of both of those, to justify the worlds that we have created. And one of the examples I use for that is the Aeneid, this epic poem of a Trojan prince leaving the burning ruins of Troy after they were defeated by the Greeks, making his way across the Mediterranean, having all sorts of adventures, including a very tragic love affair with the Queen of Carthage. And eventually he gets to Rome because that's his destiny, according to the gods, and he founds Rome. Well, that's a neat story. It was commissioned by the Emperor Augustus. And Augustus said to the poet Virgil, we need a foundation myth. We need to justify our existence, and we want to be one up on the Greeks. So Virgil wrote this wonderful, wonderful poem. And it's called the Aeneid. And it's this fabulous journey with all kinds of adventures and monsters and trips to the underworld and really interesting stuff. Very heroic. And part of the point was, yeah, you Greeks thought you'd put us down at Troy, but we're back and we're right next door and we're going to be better than you. And, see more at history. So the foundation myths are important. The journey myths are important. The self-discovery myths, one of the ones we'll talk about as a mythic theme tonight, is the wake-up call. Now, let me also say, as we go into this, we need heroes. We absolutely need more heroes today. And I'm using gender-neutral hero. Keep in mind that, by definition, a hero is someone who stands up above the rest of the crowd and who says, whoa, this is not working. Let's do something about it. And then leads a movement for change. But think about this in just your symbolism of them stepping up. The hero rises above the crowd. This can also be dangerous because then you're a target. See more at the assassinations of people trying to make change. And the establishment doesn't like it, whether it's, once again, ancient Rome and the Gracchi brothers who've been likened to the Kennedy brothers who were assassinated for much the same reason. So we find a lot of echoes in history and myth to what's going on today. How many of you have any hope that we can change any of these problems that we're facing? Yeah, once again, self-selected audience, that's why you're here. All right. And we know we can. I want to plant a seed in your minds. We've seen a lot of devolution lately. There's just been way more than I think we need of dystopian films, post-apocalyptic stories. It's like, enough of the bleak already. Occasionally you want to see those. I mean, it can be entertaining, Fury Road. Okay, 30 minutes of story, 2 hours worth of great visual adventure, right? Okay, and we like these things, but there's been so much of that, it seems to permeate the consciousness, and some people say brings about a sense of hopelessness. But sometimes you have to explore the darkness in order to change it and rise above it. So it's not, totally useless what's going on there with the devolution stories. They're mainly cautionary tales. Like the Greek tragedies, it tells you what not to do because this is how it can go horribly, horribly wrong. Then you have revolution. And if any of you have studied history or you just watch the news or you've read anything at all, you see that revolutions occur over and over and over again throughout history and in almost every place on the planet. The problem with a revolution is you're only revolving. It's like a pig on a spit. You've been cooking the belly, you have a revolution, now you're cooking the back. Well, guess what? It's going to keep turning. Counter-revolutions. And see more about the caravan of people coming up from Central America. Some say part of the reason for that, although there's certainly plenty of homegrown problems, but part of it was because they got caught into the revolution, counter-revolutions of the 80s and 90s that America was part of. Okay, so it's sort of like, I cynically say, it's kind of like, well, it's the Empire Strikes Back. You go out there and colonize, what do you think's going to happen eventually? And you see this over and over in history and the fall of empires. So revolutions, not necessarily a great idea for lasting change. Evolution, that's where we want to go. So we want to be moving, instead of in a cyclic fashion, we want to be moving up. We want to get, once again, that heroic point of view. And this is what I would urge all of you to do as writers, even if you're writing about somebody that doesn't make it. At least show us what it should look like. Okay, so we need heroes. I'm hoping that you're going to be writing them for us. And I would suggest that you do take a look at these 15 global challenges, and maybe you're already writing a story that specifically addresses one of these. Or maybe you can work it in as a subplot. Or you maybe could even just have one character come in. There's a party going on and everybody's doing party stuff, and then somebody comes in and they're all, and somebody says, well, what are you so down about? And they can give a little speech. And you've placed that in your story. And just the fact of making us all more aware is going to help wake more people up. And we need that. We need that in order to create stories that change the world. But it doesn't have to be the whole story about that particular problem. So anywhere along that spectrum of a mention to that's what the story's about. So let's talk about 3 things here as far as mythic tools. The main mythic tools, as I see it, are mythic themes and archetypes and symbols. And this is what you'll find working throughout all the best stories, is that they will have a specific theme. And what makes it a mythic theme? It's a theme that keeps being told over and over and over again. Once again, with comparative mythology, you find the same stories showing up, whether it's in New Zealand with the Maori, or it's in Northwest America, or Korea, or the Teutonic myths, Egyptian, etc. We keep telling the same stories because the human experience is rather similar. Good news for you is it's pretty global. So just by tapping into these mythic themes, you're going to be reaching something very deep within all of us as humans. And that's the great news for storytellers, is that, and there's an article, and I believe it's in my latest newsletter, and maybe the one before, but it's Your Brain on Story. There's a whole lot of neuroscience going on that shows us how story works and how it affects the brain. Also, in case you didn't already know that you're different from other people, the creative brain is physiologically different from the brains of muggles. So, you know, you can sit up a little straighter and know that you've got a great brain. And you really are different. So, we just want to be using it for the best possible results. So let's take a look first then at mythic themes, and then we'll look at archepaths, which is a bigger concept of archetypes, and then we'll take a look at symbols. Now we'll be doing a Q&A session at the end, but if anywhere along here, if I say something that you don't quite get, I haven't said it clearly enough or defined it well enough, please raise your hand and make sure that I do that. And then we'll try to keep the questions for the end so that we can keep moving through. But I want to be sure that everybody understands. And sometimes, you know, it's just the way you make a statement that isn't quite clear. So, all right, so mythic themes. And there are dozens of them, as you can see there in your handout. And they range from the very personal, my life isn't going well, I need to make some changes, what am I going to do? The wake-up call. I really want to be in love. I want the search for the soulmate. We got to get out of this place, okay? The search for the promised land. And many, many, many more. Now, when you just on your own go through this, I've listed a number of stories, both in myth and in media, that you can then follow up and add your own and start this collection. If you start thinking this way, what I would like for us all to be better at is recognizing patterns. And that's what storytellers do too, is they work with patterns. If we become more conscious of it, then we become better storytellers. So by looking this over and reading and say, oh yeah, I've seen that one, yeah, I see that one, okay. And maybe see again a couple of the films in each of these categories, and you will begin to recognize the patterns. And then you'll probably find that you personally have an affinity for a couple of them over the others, and say, yeah, that's the kind of story I want to tell. So when we're talking about appropriate themes for these 15 global challenges, well, once again, just about any theme can include it. But a couple of the ones that are quite appropriate are these. The don't ask, don't tell, or as I've taken to calling it now too, it's the secret identity. Now, hiding in plain sight, hiding under cover of camouflage by noise or whatever. But as one of my Army friends who was in intelligence used to say, oh, don't mind me, I'm just a rat in the pipes. He said, they don't even notice I'm there, but I'm there. Well, okay, tell me more. Well, I can't. So, okay. But the secret identity. So you've got someone who can infiltrate. Think about the whistleblowers or people who are investigative journalists. You know, we used to have that back in the olden days, actual journalists. They actually went out and investigated and did exposés, and it was real news and fact-checked. Quite a concept, isn't it? So the secret identity, there's some wonderful stories about this. And part of the arc of the story is going from somebody going in undercover and then how they get discovered or not, and how they discover what they need to know and the dangers that face them. Like in any heroic action, it's heroic because there is resistance. One of the laws of physics and metaphysics is form resists change. It's one of Newton's 3 laws. A body at rest tends to stay at rest. A body in motion tends to stay in motion. So you're always going to be meeting resistance. And you'll hear this over and over again in story workshops. You'll read it in the books. You observe it in what you're writing and in your own life. In order to have drama, you have to have conflict. And the conflict can come from the environment, from a specific antagonist, group of antagonists, your society, your culture, your own foibles. But once again, the hero is the person who fights against that and rises above it, even if just for a glimpse, but often for, a longer time, and really makes things happen. So the Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Now, one of my favorites, and if you haven't seen it, it's so fun, Galaxy Quest. Yeah, isn't it great? It's a group of actors, a spoof on the Star Trek series, right? And a group of actors get taken up to space by a group of aliens who think that it's real. They think the show is real. And that the captain's a real captain and the ship's a real ship. And they've built the ship on their own. They're like fanboys, right? The aliens. And they've built the entire ship. The actors realize they have to pretend to be their characters in order to accomplish the goals that have been thrust upon them. So it's a real fun story on that theme with some very poignant moments and times and a lot of good character development. The characters arc and change. It's really good. Very well written. You might take a look at that. And very entertaining. And there's lots of great lines from it too. Yes. Never give up, never surrender. Yeah. And also there are a lot of love stories there under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So another good one, and this I think is probably the iconic mythic theme, is stealing fire from heaven. Prometheus was one of the old gods, one of the old Greek gods. Here's the thing that happens over and over again in mythology too. You have the war in heaven, where one group of gods takes over, they battle with and take over from the other one. See more at countries, empires, cultures, galaxies, universes. This is what happens. In stealing fire from heaven, Prometheus, who is one of the old gods, he's one of the Titans, he looks down and sees humans, and we're stumbling around and, learning things, but it's kind of bleak and it's kind of cold if you're not in the tropics. And when the sun goes down, so do you, because it's dark. And he says, you know what? These people need fire. Just think what they could do with fire. Well, the problem with that is you're not supposed to take things from heaven and give it to the earthlings. It's like the prime directive in Star Trek, right? Don't mess with their progress. Let them discover it on their own. But Prometheus has a soft heart. He's very idealistic, and he wants to help these people. He wants to help them improve their lives. That's a very heroic stance. But he's not supposed to. He knows it could be a problem if it's discovered. But he chooses to do it anyway. And this is one of those turning points in your story where he's reminded that that's against the law in this pantheon. You're not supposed to do that. And he does it anyway. He realizes that he may suffer because of what he's going to do, but he does it anyway. Also, a thing that your Prometheus type hero can run up against is some of the people you're trying to help don't want your help or they don't trust you. You know, like the old phrase from the 60s, 70s maybe, limousine liberal. Like, oh, you rich people are going to come down here to our neighborhood and help us out. Oh, well, thank you very much. We don't need you. So there's often resistance from the group that you're going in to help. They don't trust you. You're coming in from the outside. What's your real agenda? What are you really trying to get here? So even more opposition, even more drama and conflict for your character. So Prometheus does it anyway. Steals the fire, brings it down to humans, and voila, you've got light at night, you've got barbecue, you can burn fields, burn forests and plant fields, and all the things that fire brings us. It's great for humans. Well, this does not go unnoticed. And so the gods go, Prometheus, come here. And say, you knew what you were doing. You knew there was going to be, yeah, I know. But they really needed it. And look how well they're doing. And then you can have somebody say, we didn't want them to do well. We're trying to keep them enslaved. What were you thinking? Or something to that effect. And here again, particularly if you've got whistleblower situations going on. So Prometheus's punishment was chained to a rock in the Caucasus, big old Rocky Mountains there, the eastern end of the Mediterranean. And every day, an eagle would come down and peck out his liver. And then every night, it would grow back. And the next day, the eagle would come back again and peck out his liver again. Daily, recurring, endless, eternal pain and hopelessness. Really tragic. So, there are a few versions of this myth where Prometheus unchained. Unchained. Hercules comes and saves him. And there are some poems and stories written about that, even in more modern times. So check out Prometheus Unbound if you're working on that kind of a story. And sometimes, depending on the point you want to make, let's just make this divide. You've got drama, and you've got drama that has a happy ending, and drama that has a tragic ending. Okay, the Greek tragedies, once again, they're cautionary tales. So just be sure if you're doing a cautionary tale and it doesn't end well for your hero and what they're trying to do, at least show us what victory would have looked like. We need to know what they lost. It's like, Moses standing and looking over into the promised land, but he can't go there. Or Kevin Costner on the sailboat in Waterworld, knowing that he's not going to go and land and be on land. And it's really kind of hard to compare Kevin Costner in Waterworld to Moses, but still, kind of that search for the promised land thing. You want to show us what victory would look like. So we're really sad when it doesn't happen, and how this can work for your create stories that change the world. Then people in your audience may go, okay, I see why that didn't work. I'm going to try it. I'm going to do it differently. I know what not to do. There's probably a whole lot of other things that could go wrong too, but I'm inspired to pick up that baton, to carry on that mission. So even a tragedy can inspire other people to move forward. So You're stealing fire from heaven. Now, one of the films that the high school kids did, they took the stealing fire from heaven theme, and as one of the kids said when I was talking like this to them, he goes, "Miss Smith, that's like Robin Hood, right?" I said, "Yeah, that's the Robin Hood story. Steal from the rich, the gods, give to the poor, the humans." Whether it's learning, the teacher comes in and helps kids learn, and education's one of the challenges, okay, like Dead Poets Society. Stealing fire from heaven is the Robin Hood story. And they made a really effective and compelling drama about that. So once again, do check out their videos if you have a chance. So another one is the wake-up call. You find this in a lot of stories. It's something that presumably we all do at various points in our lives anyway. So it's more of a psychological story theme. Because, just think about if any of you have kids or grandkids or ever were a kid, there are points along your development where things change. And you begin to realize, oh, it's not just me who's here. At about 2 to 3 years old, you begin to realize there's a world around you that isn't you and isn't mommy. And then you go into puberty, and it's a whole different wake-up call. Oh, geez, now what's happening? What's all this? Then you get out into higher education or into the working world or into romance and into a profession. And you're always, hopefully, waking up to these next steps. And that can be very good, close drama. Now, it can also, for the individual character. And how do they leave what they used to do? The problems inherent in a story like that are your old habits come back and try to pull you back in. So it's that inertia again. And the problem with that, and when I was studying wonderful classes in the physics of metaphysics, and there was a lot of physics in there, and the teacher was saying, now you just notice this, when you decide to change and not to do something anymore, so let's say maybe you've been working as an assistant director and you say, but I really want to be a line producer, and I'm not going to do ADing anymore. She said, watch and see. There will usually be 3 tempting offers to go back and do first AD work again. And you have to hold strong and say, I don't do that anymore. I'm a line producer. Unless, of course, you really need the money and then you take the job. But there will typically be, even if it's saying, a friend of mine, we were at a party and this good-looking guy was chatting her up. And the party was over and I said, well, Paula, what'd you think about George? He seemed to be interested in you. And there was a long pause, and she said, oh yeah, he's good looking. He's smart, he's clever, it's funny. He's the kind of mistake I used to make. You go, yeah. So your character on the wake-up call theme will be drawn back to the old ways. Or just think how hard it is to break a habit. So you're supposed to exercise 30 minutes a day. And you do it for a couple of days, and then the 3rd day and the 4th day, it's not quite so much. It's hard to change patterns. And this is something your character in a wake-up call has to confront. Now, the wake-up call is a wonderful beginning also for a hero. And just look at some of the examples there. Arthur with the sword and the stone. He thought he was just a simple peasant boy who was, living with Sir Guy's family. And then he finds out he's the king. What? Or Luke Skywalker doesn't know who he really is. So that discovery of waking up to who you really are. And it's often said that the world and our lives would be such a different place if we would all recognize and be brave enough to begin living who we really are. the vast potentials within each of us, the ability, particularly as artists, to tap into those higher realms of creativity and inspiration and bring it down. That's your job, by the way, as creative people. You are naturally wired to pick up from the creative, inspirational, some would say spiritual, realms, and bring that down through your specific, unique persona, and then interpret those ideas and put them out to the rest of the world. Receptive to the higher, causative to the lower. That's your job as creative people, and particularly as storytellers. So along that wake-up call theme, this kind of thing can be really well developed in your story and show how a person's scope of perception goes from, well, it's kind of just all about me, to, you know, this is a pretty good group and we're doing well here together. And then why we're all here in this gathering is because we also have a wider perspective on the global challenges, on the world. So show your characters shift from the close to the further out to the global, and you'll really inspire us. As we were inspired by Luke Skywalker, as we were inspired or at least awed by the special effects in Matrix. Okay, that was a really, really good wake-up call story where you think you're in reality? No. Oh, no, I've just started doing work, consulting some in virtual reality. And wow, that's pretty amazing, and is offering very effective methodologies that physiologically affect you even more than the 1, 2, 10, 100 screen ratio thing, where it's 1 foot away when it's your smartphone, it's 2 feet away when it's your computer screen, 5 feet, or rather 10 feet away if you're watching a TV from your couch, and then if you're in a theater, it could be 50 or 100 feet away. And you experience the storytelling and the visuals differently according to where the screen is placed. And so as storytellers, you keep that in mind. One of my favorite films ever was Lawrence of Arabia. And when people started being able to watch movies on cell phone, I went, why would you? I mean, you're going to lose it's going to be just little ants down there. You're not going to get it. So if you're making a web series, you're going to compose your shots differently than if you're doing something in 70 millimeter. That just goes without saying. And now virtual reality, and I would urge you, if you haven't yet experienced it, try to experience the goggles, because it's going to require a different type of storytelling, simply because the way you can do the way you can't do cuts and the way you have to do the flow of the visuals. Did you have a question?
Assuming with virtual reality, because it's not moving, right? And everything's happening around you, so it's almost like writing theater.
That's a good question, and I think I'll be looking more into that. But the answer is yes. What we're finding too now is that a lot of the virtual reality experiences have built into the systems a way for the goggles to know where you're looking, so they can then move important visuals to that spot. And it's just every day there are new developments in the technology and in the storytelling. But yeah, it's much more, I think you're right, much more theatrical than it is filmic, because you don't have the cuts in the same way that you do otherwise. But I'm still exploring it, so we'll talk more about that. And certainly if any of you have some good suggestions on where to learn more about that too, I'd be interested in hearing, because there's a lot out there, but it's a developing art form, and it's very exciting. Okay, now another really effective mythic theme is twins. Okay? Having both sides of a situation or a a conflict. So, for instance, if you're doing the, let's say, the rich-poor gap, you've got one, and they don't have to be obviously, physically related twins, but it's that whole concept of the good, like in The Dark Knight, was a really good example of the twins concept at work. Okay, so, and also the movie Heat, which is with De Niro and the other guy, who's the other guy in it? Pacino, thank you so much. Yes, Pacino and De Niro, and it's a twins story. And this can be really effective to bring out in dialogue and in the locales where your characters live, the differences. One of them lives in a castle, the other lives in a peasant hut, and yet they represent two sides of a conflict of a story. So you can really use that a lot. And what's an effective thing too in your story arcs is where you've got, let's say, at the beginning of the story, let's see, you're left, okay, at the beginning of the story, one character's here and the other's here. Through the course of the story, they cross and take the opposite positions. And that can be really interesting, where the good guy becomes corrupted and the bad girl becomes enlightened. So you could do a lot with the twins theme. And then also just, within us, we have at least one other personality, more like lots more probably. But the twins theme can also be internal as well as external. And it gives you a really good opportunity to raise questions about climate change or technology or education. And because drama's conflict, if you get a twins thing in there, you got a good opportunity for conflict. Now, also keep in mind, I should mention, that you don't necessarily just have one theme, unless it's a short film. For a longer story, and certainly if you get into a TV series, you can have your main theme, and then your subplot theme, and then a theme for the romance, or once again, if it's a TV series, depending on how long it goes, you can work a lot of themes in under your main theme, but there will be one overarching theme. Okay, twins is a good one. Search for the Promised Land, we've talked a little bit about that before. And this is usually a much bigger in scope story because it's about not just an individual, but it's about a group of people who, see more at immigration around the world right now. For various reasons, people are being displaced and they have to go look for another place to be out of sheer survival. And sometimes, you bet, for economic advantage, and sometimes just for adventure. As often we are reminded, America is a young country, and all of us who weren't here when the Europeans started coming over are immigrants, right? So, kind of get a sense of perspective on this down with the immigrants thing, because most of us have at one point or another been that. And a lot of times it was just for adventure. So the search for the Promised Land can be a journey of a group of people for various reasons. And then do they make it, do they not? How many of them make it? What are the results? And along the way, you can put up lots of barriers and conflicts and challenges to them. So it is a rich opportunity. Also, it offers you a lot of opportunity to use symbols. And again, think of Mad Max Fury Road and the wide open spaces, and they're headed for what was once a green and fertile land. And when they get there, there's nothing there. And that symbol of that sere open wasteland is just no hope, no hope. And they had to turn around and go back, which is kind of a twist on the search for the Promised Land theme. It didn't end like most of them do. So in that sense, they really played with that theme, and I think did a nice job of saying, what do you do if when you get there it ain't there no more? And of quite dramatic.
So are you saying that it's Wizard of Oz? In a way, like, because it's like they have to go back to where they started, right? And I feel like Wizard of Oz is the whole idea that there's no place like home. So it's like this weird dystopian search for something that really you started at.
You know, that's a good question. Right offhand, I would say not exactly, because, although she was forced into being lost, being an immigrant, being an explorer because of the tornado. Okay, definitely we're going to write this down and think about that some more. Thank you. And that's a wake-up call story too, particularly for her three companions who realized, oh, they had it all within them all along. Okay, another one is War in Heaven. So a lot of what's going on behind these global challenges are battles of ideals and agendas. And whether it's like in the Cold War, communism versus capitalism, whether it's like the Peloponnesian Wars with Sparta versus Athens, two different lifestyles. The Athenians were it was sort of like Beverly Hills versus boot camp, you know, because Sparta was all austere and it's the warrior thing and we're tough and yeah. But it changed the course of history. That war went on for 23 years and changed everything. It's been likened in military parlance to a battle between a whale and an elephant, because one of them had a great army and the other had a great navy. And so, you know, this war in heaven roamed all over the place geologically. So we're seeing that somewhat in the politics of today, not just here, but around the world, where different people's vision of how the world should be is on trial, and the battle lines are being drawn. No, I think it should be this way, and this is how everybody should act, and this is what should happen. Well, no, it should be this way, and this is how everybody should act, and this is how it should happen. And you've got that dichotomy, that conflict. Once again, your hero rises above conflict, gets up to a position where they can see concept. And that's where you can begin to make changes. Yeah, you need people fighting in the trenches, absolutely. You need people to register, if they can, and go out and vote, whichever way they choose to. But we're going to get changes when we rise above the conflict and don't get caught up and trapped in it, and can see the concepts and then start to make changes that way from that different perspective. Another one is the going native. Now, this is kind of a reverse of the wake-up call, but not really. But you've got an individual who goes into a culture that they are not familiar with, but they eventually become part of it. And so the opportunity for you when you're talking about stories that can change the world is this new person in the situation has to learn about that culture. So you've got a perfect opportunity. Think of Avatar, and I think why it was so popular is one of these underlying mythic themes of going native. You know, you have Jake, who comes from the military arm of an extraction capitalism system, and he goes into an interconnectedness where all is one and we are with nature system, and it's explained to him and shown to him, and he experiences it. And as we watch it, we learn. So putting your character in a unique stranger in a strange land situation, and a lot of sci-fi stories are about this because it's a perfect setup for showing us a system and showing us how people can adapt or not, or bring changes in. So take a look at some of these stories listed there under a going native, And you can see how you can use this to your advantage in a story that you want to address, let's say maybe technology. So you have somebody who doesn't know anything about technology coming into a system, and as they're learning about it, as it's being explained to them, they're going to be able to see more of the downfall than the people who've drunk the Kool-Aid or wired the tech or whatever. So you have, once again, that chance to have an outside perspective, and then either that person, depending on how you're setting up your story, that person then can be changed by going native, like Jake was in Avatar. Or they can go in and they can change the system by bringing something new into it. Yes?
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure going native isn't on the handout, right? This is something that you've added?
It's not on the one that you have? Oh, okay. And certainly if any of you want to take some of the extra handouts, if you have other people who might like to have the information, do feel free to do that. Yeah. Now, one last thing, and then we'll take a little break. The search for the Holy Grail, in a sense, that's what you're doing. You're looking for answers that will solve the problems of the kingdom. The Holy Grail serves the kingdom, or let's say the group, the empire, whatever. And in your search for that, we are told that our job is to be like Parsifal. And he was the knight who really wanted to find the Holy Grail, and he wanted to be a better person than he was, and he wanted to serve. And all the knights went out, but along with him went Galahad, who was a very young and innocent knight. And he was looking for the light and the purity, and he was pure. And the third one was Gawain, and he was a party boy. And it's like, oh, okay, adventure, all right. Do some wenching, do some dragon fighting, do some drinking, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Oh, and if we find the Holy Grail, that's good too. So they go out, they have all their adventures. What's interesting to us as storytellers is at the end of their quest, the Grail does appear. Now, Galahad, because he is pure, he gets taken up into the light. Gawain can't even see the light. He's probably got a bad hangover. And he's just, what? Huh? I don't get it. Parsifal sees the light of the Grail, but he's still of the earth, so he doesn't get taken up into the light. His job is to be the doorway. And that's our job as artists. That's your job as storytellers, is to be the doorway. Because a lot of people can't see the light, but they can see you. And you are that pivot point, that doorway, that, once again, receptive to the higher, causative to the lower. You're at that point there where you can see it and you can point it out and you can explain it to people. And then the hope is, with the myth and with our own work, then others will begin to see it too. And we should, of course, stay humble about that and not think that we've got the only answer and the only light, but that is the mythic position of the storyteller, is to be like Parsifal. So on that note, we will take a little break for break's sake, and then we will come back and we will talk about the archepaths and about symbolism, and then we will have the Q&A. Okay? Thank you all. All right, so we've talked about mythic themes, and I want to now tell you something about an important thing you need to have in your story, and that is mythic statements. And there is a page there in your handouts for the mythic statements. And yes, subtext is important. Absolutely. You don't want your dialogue on the nose. However, there are 3 times in a story when you need to have somebody specifically say what's going on. And those 3 mythic statements are the thematic statement, what's the story about? The mission statement, what's the hero supposed to do? And the lesson statement, what does the heroine hero learn? So the thematic statement, the mission statement, and the lesson statement. Now, you know that you're supposed to write the beginning of your story like a hologram of the story, so that we know pretty quickly whether it's a comedy, a drama, is it sci-fi, how are we supposed to think about it? I think the best example of that to me is from the first Star Wars movie, and I mean the first one that came out. Forget that other confusing numbering system. So you're sitting there, and it's this big field of stars, right, and the writing's gone by, and there's this ship. You don't know how big it is, but the ship comes flying in, and it's going. You go, okay, we're in space. All right, got that. And then the theater starts to rumble, and surround sound is shaking the place. And from behind you on the right comes in the prow of a ship. And it's going, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's going after that little one. And right then you know, David and Goliath in space. Brilliantly done, holographic opening, tells you what the story's about at the very beginning. Yes?
Sorry, can I get you to repeat those three things?
I certainly will, and I'll give you some examples. Yeah, the three things are the thematic statement, what's the story about? And that usually comes in the first act and pretty early on, so we know what the story's about. Because we all have seen so much, we've read so much, we know so much, we're exposed to so much. You need to get us focused right away on your story. The second is the mission statement. What's the hero supposed to be doing? Now that typically will also come in the first. You know, it's usually like, to use the strict page number paradigms, that's like page 10. Okay, when the hero gets the mission, now I've got to go and do X, Y, Z. And then that sets it off on the course. And then the third is the lesson statement, the epiphany, when the hero learns what they really were meant to learn. And it's often not the same as the mission statement. It's something usually internal, and it's something that we are supposed to be able to apply personally to us as well. Thematic statement is the big theme. The mission statement is the goal, the mission. And then the lesson statement is the epiphany or the lesson that the hero learns in the course of the story. Now, whether or not your protagonist, once again, wins or not, they should still get the lesson, even if they didn't make it to victory, even if they weren't able to fulfill their mission. So the lesson statement will typically come at the end of the story. However, my favorite movie of all time is Apocalypse Now. It's exceptionally mythic. And they mix it all up, and everything happens at the beginning of the story. And we first hear from Captain Willard about what he learned. And he says, everybody gets everything they asked for. I asked for a mission, and for my sins, they gave me one. And he says, it's no accident that I was the keeper of Colonel Kurtz's story, because to tell his story is to tell my story. So right there at the very beginning, it's like, whoa, now what's going to happen? And then we get the mission, and he goes to the trailer where the general and the CIA guy and Harrison Ford are there, and he gets his mission. And his mission is to go upriver, find Colonel Kurtz, who is acting beyond all reasonable pale of human responsibility. He's become a god. He's it's got to be over. So his mission is terminate the colonel's command, terminate with extreme prejudice. Go take him out. So the thematic statement is given right after that. And the general says, there's a conflict in every heart between the rational and the irrational, and the good does not always win. Sometimes the dark side overcomes what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. Every man has got his breaking point. And that's your thematic statement. You know, it's a battle between light and dark. And it happens in here as well as out there. Now, on your own, I would suggest that you read the mythic statements from Lord of the Rings, and they're on that page of the examples. Oh, if we were showing clips, I'd show the clip, but then we'd all be in tears. It's so fabulous. But it's about story and darkness, and once again, the mission of the storytellers. It's just brilliant. So that's about themes. Well, let's talk about characters and character arcs. Now there are, okay, you're all familiar with archetypes. We're having some Jung mentions up here. And archetypes, plenty of them, lots of them. You know, the orphan, the lover, the martyr, the mother, the king, the warrior, the this, the that, the other. Okay, and that's all well and good, that's great. In the deeper aspects of many spiritual systems, there is what's called the paths to enlightenment, the 5 paths of enlightenment. And those 5 paths are the path of the warrior, the path of clergy, the path of the scientist, the magician, and the lover. And any archetype can be under any of those paths. So you can have a martyr lover, you can have the orphan scientist, etc. But these are bigger, overreaching, and I call them the archepaths. And it's a whole lot more, I find it more efficient. It's not as unwieldy as all the different archetypes, because it gives you a clear, concise way to craft your characters, to take them through changes, and to have dramatic conflict between characters. Now, I'm going to explain to you using the warrior archepath, and then the conceptual explanations will apply to all the other 4 as well. And then you've got information on your handouts about the various aspects. What's handy for us as storytellers is that each of the paths has 3 levels. And this is just really consistent throughout most cultures, your initiatory systems, Freemasonry. You've got the entered apprentice, and then you've got the adept, and then the master. You've got grade school, middle school, high school. Okay? You've got bachelor's degree, master's degree, a PhD. Steps of 3 are pretty typical. And another one of those numbers that shows up a lot. So take a look at the warrior. The steps are the soldier, the warrior, and the monarch. What we're interested here in when you're building your characters is the effect. Think of an upside down pyramid. And the first step is that lower step. And think about the soldier, or let's say even with the clergy, the novice. Okay? You don't know much, you're just starting out, you're taking orders, you're not thinking for yourself, and you don't have a really big influence on the world around you. You're at this bottom little level here. And that's where you start building. You're raking the rocks, you're doing the exercises, you're learning how to use your weapons, etc. It's all about learning. And it's also hopefully about being devoted to moving up. So then that's a great opportunity for you to have your character learn things and then get promoted, if you will, into that next level, that middle level. is where most will live, and the second level, because not everybody makes it up to the top level. It's more rare, but there's a wider effect on the world around them. So where the soldier level doesn't have a whole lot of influence, the warrior level does. And the warrior is a leader. They're out there in the vanguard of the charge. They're the one who can assess the battlefield, make decisions right then and there. What should we do? They're the people on the front lines of protests. They're the ones who are strategizing and making all of the plans for what's going to happen. And this is across the board too with the other archopaths. And they know what they're doing. And they say, trust me, I know what I'm doing. I'm trained. I'm a trained professional. Okay? And the next step up then is more rarefied, and that is the monarch, the ruler, the general, the empress, the deity that is commanding the armies. You know, a lot of those in the Egyptian mythology too. You see that hierarchy in, well, just about everywhere. So the thing to remember with that also is they have a wide range of influence on the world below and around them. And so how will you visualize that in your stories? As simple as having, if I was at the soldier level and you all were too, we might be two separate groups, little companies. And then when we're at the warrior level, there'll be more people. And then at the monarch level, you're looking down over the large crowd. So think of it in terms of the scope of your blocking of a scene. Is it close? Is it medium? Is it a wide shot? And the influence that the people have on those. A very good example of a character on the warrior path who, in doing the rise and the fall, has a fall first, is what we see, and that's in Gladiator. Because at the beginning of that story, Russell Crowe is a general, and he's probably going to be an emperor. But, so he's at the very top, right? But he gets captured, plummets to the very bottom. And the rest of the story is about him making his way back up the levels. And that can be really, really effective. So wherever you put your characters at the beginning of the story, are they striving to rise up? Are they in level 2 and real satisfied and they get tempted down or hit down? Maybe they become a refugee. They've been a doctor on the scientist path and war comes to their country. Now they're a refugee. Now they're nothing. How do they get back up? Well, in Gladiator, Russell Crowe used his talents and his determination and the help of some friends that he made along the way. And he does make his way back up. And in his last actions, he does something that is very top level. He makes a personal self-sacrifice for the good of the Republic, the Empire. So when you're talking about character change and growth, think about moving around those levels. Also, each of the paths has 3 approaches: the emotional, the mental, and the synthesized. And I saw this really in action when I was in a think tank for the Army. And a number of the people we were all working on the warrior spirit and bringing mythology into the military, etc. This was during the Clinton administrations, right after the fall of the wall. It was a peace dividend, and everybody was, wow, let's see what else we can do with the military, because we're not fighting the Cold War anymore. Okay, well, that was nice for a while. But during that time, it was interesting to see which of the warriors, and these were mostly officers, were more inclined towards emotional and passionate and idealistic, and which were more inclined towards the rational, the analytical, the strategic. And yet they were all on the warrior path. and which ones were synthesized. And those were typically the generals and some of the more high-ranking, because that's how you get there, is by being able to synthesize both of those paths. So that's another point of conflict for you. You've got characters, let's say, one who's at the top, one who's at the bottom. They're at odds with each other. Somebody's on the emotional path, someone else is on the rational path. They're at odds with each other. And then how do you resolve that through the course of your story? Keeping in mind we're talking about stories that can change the world, be sure to give them some of those speeches, some of those positions. And conflict's a wonderful cauldron in which to put different ingredients and stir it up, and the heat comes, and wow, you can get some amazing things happening. So be sure to keep your conflict going. Also keeping in mind that one of the reasons, again, that we have these problems is because people have different agendas. Whether it's the rich-poor gap, whether it's international crime, and all the way to education, who gets educated, who doesn't. People have different agendas. So you can have those agendas come out in those three levels or in the three paths. And, hopefully get your characters, your protagonists and some of the others to become synthesized and to get into, say, the upper boundary between the second level and that higher level. Yes, question?
Yeah, I'm just trying for the warrior. There's a lot of anti-heroes, right, that are warriors. So you don't have to have like a righteous path, right?
Okay, good question. Do you have to have a righteous path for the protagonist? Because a lot of anti-heroes, for instance, are in the military. A lot of them are warriors. Yes, that's the nature of your question?
Yeah, I think especially today that a lot of the most compelling stories, in my opinion, are reflecting the anti-hero's journey, where you don't want them to win, but you do in some sort of way because you become emotionally attached to them. So I guess I'm just trying to understand how that would fall into the archetype of the warrior.
Oh, okay. An anti-hero is still a hero, but they're going against the establishment, right? They're against the system. That's what makes them anti. They are rebellious. And that's where a lot of your heroes come from, are from the rebellious side. The ones who, once again, step out or step up from the established way of doing things. Absolutely, anti-heroes, I think, are really, really important, and particularly today, because if we do nothing, if we do not rebel in some way against the status quo, against what's happening, we're not going to change anything. So we probably need more anti-heroes. What's interesting, and some of us were discussing this fairly recently, and somebody said, well, the anti-hero often does the right thing without meaning to. And then what happens to them when all of a sudden they've done the right thing and they've spent their whole time trying to be the resistor, to be the rebel? What? So you can give them a real emotional quandary when that happens. And once again, keeping in mind that principle of, even if it doesn't happen to the protagonist or the antagonist, we need to know what could happen. So we're always wanting to know, what's that goal? What would heaven look like? What would winning be? And your anti-hero can be, I think, really effective in pointing out the flaws of a system. They have carte blanche to do that. That's their job as the anti-hero, is to say, what are you people thinking? You have any idea what you're doing? So they can be very, very effective in bringing out the theme and the lessons in a story. And you're right, they're usually the most interesting ones. One of my favorite anti-heroes is in an old film from Walter Hill, and it's called Streets of Fire. Diane Lane is in it. And it came out, I think, in '82 maybe. It's a rock and roll fable. Willem Dafoe, Diane Lane. It's fabulous. We watch it like twice a year, and we know all the lines. And it's so much fun. Streets of Fire, check it out. And Michael Pare is the anti-hero in that. He's got this wonderful line where he says, yeah, something like, I'm not a hero. I'm the kind of guy that other guys send to do jobs like this. Perfect anti-hero. So the thing to also keep in mind with your arc of paths is the key word and their mission. And once again, this is on your handouts, but I'll just go through the one for the warriors, because I think it's so important. Once again, if we're working on doing stories that can change the world, the warrior's job, and this has gotten so distorted lately, as it does cyclically throughout history. But the warrior's mission is to protect and defend the weak and the innocent. Not the stupid and the lazy, but to protect and defend the weak and the innocent. And also to promote the good, the true, and the beautiful. Go out there and fight for it, and then also promote it. And to reclaim the warrior path into its ideal, valiant, honorable core would be something wonderful to see. We certainly need it. And certainly a lot of people who are officially in the armed services are very idealistic, and they are trying to do these things. And they're often up against a corrupt system and, see more at reality. And, of course, lots of movies. So as you go through these other paths, do note that your characters, you want them to be really identifying with the mission. So also key words. The key word for the warrior is purpose. They've got a goal, got a mission, and they have to stay on purpose. The clergy path is all about putting yourself apart from matter. It's about disengaging from the material world. And the key word there is purity. And it's doing the fasts. It's going and living in a cave in the Himalayas for a month at a time and having cold rice and yak butter. Okay? It's austerities, right? It's the sacrifices. Now, the clergy path, like every path, there's a spectrum and it can go bad. And part of the downside of the clergy path is you can get into a lot of self-sacrifice and self-scourging, and then deciding everybody else should be scourged also. And if you're not living up to my ideal, well, then maybe you shouldn't be living. Like I say, all the paths can go bad, but the clergy path has a tendency to get, well, as Monty Python says, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, but there it is. So you got to watch that. The scientist path I find really interesting because the top level of the scientist path, student, curious, wants to know everything, scientist, very adept at what they're doing, they're coding, they're exploring the seas, they're breaking down the genomes. But the top level of the scientist path is the philosopher, because you're taking that innate curiosity and that tendency to look for patterns and to look for cause and effect and to test it out. And just think of some of the wonderful books that are written by, or just watch Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? He's a philosopher. And a lot of those advanced scientists are. They become interested in consciousness, the cosmos. Is there intelligence elsewhere? The big questions. And the scientist path is about process. If you're writing code and you don't have absolutely every comma and every quotation mark in the right place, it's not going to work. The process must be exact. And so also when I teach actors, it's like, okay, if you're on a scientist path, you need everything to be very neat and all lined up. And the process is really important. And so they act differently. And you can, if you're doing novels, get more into that. But certainly your characters can be given some dialogue and direction that will help in that portrayal. The magician, once again, you're all magicians because you are storytellers. The definition of a magician is someone who sees patterns that others cannot see and creates patterns where they did not exist. Sees patterns others cannot see, creates patterns where they did not exist. That's a magician. By the very act of writing, you are creating patterns that were not there. Now, you may be following old patterns like a mythic theme and using archepaths, but it's always going to be unique, unless you're a hack writer or you're hired to be hackish for this project. Well, that's okay. But it's always going to be coming through your unique personality. And if you've taken any writing courses where you're given an assignment, write about your first pet. Everybody's story is different, even if everybody had a calico cat. The stories are going to be different because it's coming through you. So you're creating patterns that did not exist before, and that's your job. And the key word for the magician is performance. Because typically if someone's a magician, they're very open and wide and flamboyant and showy, and they'll wear capes and exotic jewelry and maybe have, oh, wait a minute, Harry Potter. You can learn a lot about magicians just from reading and watching those movies. But it's all about the performance for magicians. And their goal is to get control of the seen and unseen forces. Then the fifth of these paths is the lover path. I find this one interesting. Of course, the key word is passion. What else would it be, right? At the first level, you've got the admirer or the fan, and they are alone. Your character wants to be in love. They yearn to be in love, but they're alone. And that drive drives them, that yearning drives them through the story. So that first level is all about desiring, wanting. The dark side of that, stalkers. Okay? It's on a lover path, but it's that lower level dark side. At the second level on the lover path, you've got relationships. So first you've got a singleton, then you've got relationships. Whether it's two people or you've got a polyamorous situation or a menage a trois, whatever, but there is relationship. At the higher level again, though, you've got more solitary of a position. That's where you find, because remember this is the monarch level, the high priestess level, the philosopher. That's where you'll find your goddesses and gods of compassion, like the Queen Isis of the Egyptian pantheon, the Virgin Mary, Kuan Yin, Inanna, Caradwin. Just look at the mother goddesses. They are above. They may have consorts, but it's not about them in relationship with an equal. It's about them in relationship with all of those whose lives they encompass and influence. So in the lover path, you go from a singleton to in a relationship to a person alone, but influencing and collecting within their area of influence many, many, many other people. And once again, think of these 5 paths, the 3 levels, and the 3 approaches, and realize those are all opportunities for dramatic conflict. And I often find that using the good old-fashioned 3x5 cards can be really helpful. And I know the latest version of Final Draft also has the cards breakdown program, which can be very effective too, depending on whether you like to handle cards or watch it on a screen. But think of the conflicts that you can build just by the very nature of the characters that you are crafting. And that those conflicts are wonderful opportunities again to get out your message about one of the global challenges or some other problem that you see, and then what solutions might be found. Now, when it comes to symbolism, we're talking about a visual medium here, and there are 3 levels of symbolism. One is the emotional level, personal. See, it's another set of 3s. And the next level is situational, and then conceptual. So once again, we're going from close in to further out to the highest observer level. And you'll see there a list of movies and particulars for each of these. Just using Avatar again. At the emotional level for the symbolism, you've got Jake in the wheelchair. He's immobilized to an extent. And that symbol of the wheelchair also tells us about his psychological state. He's not a whole person. He is disabled emotionally because of losses, and whether it's the loss of his brother, or the loss of his own mobility, his self-confidence. So it's an excellent symbol for that emotional, personal level. Then at the situational level, you've got, in Avatar again, you have the community of the Na'vi versus the community of the extraction capitalists who are there to rape the planet. And the machines and the tools versus nature. And that situation of nature versus man-made coming together is the inherent conflict, that situational conflict. And you see that with the helicopters and the flying dragon creatures. Okay? One is symbolic of nature, the other is symbolic of technology. It's real obvious, it's real effective. And then at the conceptual level, really nicely done with the cinematography and the art direction, I think, was the trees, where we've been seeing the family trees, the village trees, but there towards the end we see how deep the connection with the trees goes and how complex is the interconnectedness. And it's that interconnectedness of all life. And ultimately, many would say, that's what we're trying to realize in our own wake-up calls. That's one of the concepts that's going to help us address any of these global challenges. They're global because they affect everybody, because we're all interconnected. So the solutions also have to be global because we're all interconnected. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges in the challenges, is how do you get everybody to go along with it? You've got 10 people, and 9 of them say, hey, that's a great idea, let's do that. But the 10th person is the one who holds the bank account. Guess what's going to happen? What that 10th person wants to have happen. Until you can either have a revolution or a devolution, it all falls apart, or our favorite approach, evolution. So getting up to that sense of interconnectedness. And once again, remember, that's what a hero does. They stand up above the crowd and they see things other people did not see, patterns. They become a magician. They create patterns. They influence more people around them. And they bring about, hopefully, very, very positive changes. So think about these 3 levels of the emotions. There's another movie I would suggest you to see if you have not, and even if you have, watch it for the symbolism, and that's Bertolucci's film, The Conformist. It's brilliant. I mean, well, Bertolucci's brilliant, can't go wrong there. But in The Conformist, the symbolism is so exquisitely used on all levels. And you'll see examples there in the handout. But if you can get The Conformist on the DVD, there is a wonderful special features section. It might be available also on streaming, but it goes into the symbolism. There's a really good featurette about Bertolucci's symbolism, and it's just brilliantly, brilliantly done. And as writers and filmmakers, it can be very inspirational. So we've covered now the need for heroism, and that hopefully you're all going to be writing wonderful heroes for us. How to use mythic themes, and we've discussed some of them that can be particularly relevant to this type of storytelling that has a message. And I do this, and I suggest you as well could do this, is just go through those 15 challenges and say, well, what mythic theme do I think could fit under this one real well? That will give you, once more facility of working with the mythic themes and recognizing patterns and starting to use them. We talked about the mythic statements that every story needs, the thematic statement, the mission statement, and the lesson statement. And then we took a look at archepaths as 5 approaches to life and styles of interacting with life: the warrior path, the clergy path, the path of the scientist, of the magician, and the lover, and how each of those has 3 levels and 3 approaches, and how you can use those for story arcs and character arcs and internal and external conflict. And then symbolism, the 3 levels there of the emotional, the situational, and the conceptual. And then how you can use those, once again, to reveal the problems that you're trying to address and show us possible solutions. So what we'll do now is have a question and answer time. And anybody have a question in particular?
I actually do really quickly.
Yes.
So going back to your Holy Grail example, so Parsifal, warrior, the younger innocent one, the monk, and then lover for
Yes.
the drunkard.
Give this man an A. That's right.
Just because I wanted to connect it to that story. So that's basically person who ascends, person who holds the door, person who's kind of in the shadow aspect of lover, loving alcohol too much, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Well done, well
Okay.
done. Yeah. Yeah, Galahad is on the path of the clergy. He's the innocent, purity. Parsifal is the warrior, has his purpose. And yeah, Gawain's path of the lover. Bit of the dark side on that. Passion. But seriously, you got to have some fun. You're on a mission, looking for the Grail. Things aren't always fun. But yeah, very, very well assessed. Other comments, questions? Yes.
I saw the bookshop recently. Did you see that? It's with Patricia Clarkson and it's Emily Mortimer. And so I was just wondering, aside from the rich, poor gap theme, I was wondering what other themes you might think are in it. And I can tell you, it's just about a woman who's a widow, and she goes to a town to open up a bookshop. And she changes kind of like the town's very curious about this one bookshop that she's opened. She has some books that maybe, I think she might have a leader there. And so the lady, Patricia Clarkson, is sort of the head of the Arts Council, wealthy woman, very charming, quite socially sort of skilled in getting people to do her bidding. And she doesn't want this woman there. And it's a fascinating look, aside from the rich-poor gap, of just sort of somebody who wants to like live out their passion versus somebody else who's maybe already established in the town, and how that shakes up the apple cart. And I was just wondering, aside from the rich-poor gap, what other themes might be? And I realize if you haven't seen it, that'd be difficult to...
Yeah, I have not seen the bookshop.
The bookshop, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. It might be you might have a bit of a stealing fire from heaven there if the woman who comes in and is opening the bookshop is bringing, like Lolita, new ideas, opening literary concepts, bringing in, gee, maybe we ought to look beyond our own little town borders. So there could be, and education and learning is often on the stealing fire from heaven path, because look at the first thing that oppressive regimes do is what? Burn the books and kill the intellectuals. So,
And the journalists.
pardon?
And the journalists. They kill
And the journalists, that's right. Anybody who can think, we cannot allow. So there might be some of that in there as well. And maybe not on the vicious scale of MMDs, murderous military dictatorships, but it sounds like that might be one of them. Yeah, and I've put it down to check it out. Thank you. Other comments, questions? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Well, I want to take advantage and try to make some questions relating to the story I'm working so I can pick your brains.
Okay.
Thought that before.
Well, let me,
What is the coming of age, the hero's journey? Would it be like, if he does that, if he's like a warrior that goes to explore that new world and be in adventures?
it sounds like it. It sounds also like you've got some wake-up call theme in there,
Yeah.
and also a going native theme, because it's an individual going into another society.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and learning about some group that's very, very different from him. Just look at like Dances with Wolves.
Yeah.
Okay, somebody from a different culture totally going into another one, and then we learn more about that culture that they go into. So that just right offhand sounds like something you might look into as far as aligning more
Okay.
of the mythic theme that way. Good luck with that, though. See, the nice thing about sci-fi and fantasy is, by their very nature, they give us the opportunity to inspect our reality and get a different perspective on it. Good luck with that.
Thanks.
But I can't believe that humans are the bad people.
It was a hard one.
Yeah, really.
Sure.
So, someone else had another question? Oh, yes. Look, she was first, and then we'll come to
You
you.
can go, it's fine, I'll go.
Oh, okay.
I guess it's a quick question. Do you think there are stories that, instead of helping these issues, harm?
Good question. Are there stories that harm rather than help addressing these issues, global issues? Yeah. And to me, those would be the ones where people get away with bad stuff and there are no consequences, and not just for them, because sometimes that's okay if we know that somewhere down the line they're going to get theirs, but where it's just, there's no redemption even offered, or no hope, and hope is squashed. Now, what would some of those be, you might ask? And now this is just personal. I appreciate that a lot of people like them. I just can't do the horror movies. And I can't do the horror books. I was reading, it was one of the books about alien abduction, Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, I think it was, about alien abductions years ago. And actually I was going to go to a party and meet him, and I thought, God, probably a good idea to read the book, right? Well, I had to read it in the daytime. At night, I had to put it in the freezer so I could even sleep. It was that disturbing. So I think some of the stories that don't offer any hope of redemption or change can be deleterious. And they're often the stories that are telling us, just shut up, this is the way things are. You can't protest. There's no point in standing up. There's no point in thinking it could be different. This is the way it is. This is the way it's always been. Hush up, be quiet, sit down.
I kind of felt that way with Nightcrawler, that, where he just gets everything he wants,
Yes.
And he lets that guy die, and then he's able to still make all this money. And then I left that film being like, what am I supposed to feel now? You know, that you should be cutthroat in the world to get what you want.
What about Lolita?
Lolita?
Yeah.
Nature of the question, or just
I
a
mean,
general?
like, in terms of that character, what did he really learn by the end of that film? Did he?
I don't think he learned much.
But he was our protagonist, right?
He was a very flawed man.
Yeah, but then, I guess, so then my question's going back to what she was saying then, is like, what if your hero doesn't learn anything?
But I think Lolita was so successful because it was crafted such that we learned something.
What, that we can fall in love
Okay.
with
Yeah, that we
a
can
girl
make-
just based off of beautiful prose?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Isn't
And-
that kind of what Anne Rand kind of did a little bit, though? I mean, some of her characters did change, but the world around them changed. And I personally tend to like some of those stories. Yeah.
I
they're more
hate to
interesting.
admit it these days. It's hard to admit liking Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
I kind of had one question in the same vein again, where the work of H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh,
where it's,
yes.
You know, mythologically based, but it's, if you've read plenty of it, it seems like he always goes through like super pains to make the protagonist seem super, super normal and competent, and then slowly, you know, there's forces outside that just kind of overwhelm them. And sometimes they make it out alive, sometimes they make it out scarred, but that's one of the, I love his work personally, and that whole, the mythology, the mythos that's kind of grew up around it, but I was kind of wondering the same thing, where I don't know if that format, as much as I like that style, would be particularly useful for writing stories to help change the world in these particular goals. I was kind of wondering if, because at the end it's kind of the same thing. Well, what do? There's a giant meatball god that's just gonna like eat up the whole universe, and he's catching a glimpse of part of one of his servants drives you insane. So, but
Yeah, Lovecraft is a good example for, can we find any sense of redemption in his characters, his stories? And it's kind of hard at times. Like with, is it Matthew McCormack, who wrote No Country for Old Men? Yeah, his stories are bleak, dark. Oh. Once again, the question is, can you write that kind of a story and have it address any of these issues? Yes, you can. I think it's probably more difficult. But if part of what those characters are going through and up against are these problems, and even if it seems like futility, let's say transnational organized crime, and boy, just look into that a little bit, and it blew my hair back to find out how much was going on. Did you know there's a mafia for sand?
I'm just hearing about that.
Yeah, yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah, look up the sand mafia. It's really interesting. Yeah. So if you show us in one of those dark, bleak stories a situation and think of, okay, what would be a good symbol for that situation? And maybe, let's just say you're using sand mafia, we're making this up as we go along. Maybe somebody is an investigative journalist investigating the sand mafias and comes to a place where people are just being buried by the sand. Anybody who's trying to protest is just buried by it and covered up by it. That could be a situational symbol that you could use. So you can work that in without getting preachy. Jump off into another concept here, or let's say it's part of the alphabet of story. It's the 4 E's. And think of a pie chart, and what is the percentage in your story? If you were drawing the pie chart of your story, how much of it is entertainment? How much of it is education, letting people know something? How much of it is enlightenment, bringing new perspectives and aspiration and uplifting? And how much of it is just pure expression? This is what I want to do. And, take a look at maybe your favorite 5 movies and draw the pie chart. And make sure that one of them is something where the director is very indulgent. And it's all about them. And you can tell. It's all up there on the screen. Y'all are nodding. It's like we've all seen those movies, yes. And sometimes, and it's perfectly fine, it's 95% entertainment. And maybe, 2% education and 3% enlightenment. I mean, some of the Transformer films, there's a little bit of message in there, but mostly it's just entertainment, and that's okay. But for the type of stories that can change the world, you're going to want to have a little bit more education and enlightenment. And always you want some of that to be your personal expression so that it's coming through you that we're getting this story. And also you have to make it entertaining or nobody's going to watch. So it's a flexible pie chart, but play with that a bit. It can become very enlightening to yourself as a writer to see what you're doing. And you had a question or comment?
No, I was just gonna ask if you could repeat the 4 E's, but you.
Oh yes, the 4 E's, yeah. Entertainment, education, enlightenment, and expression. Yes.
So I have done a lot of reading on archetypes themselves.
Uh-huh.
And I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, sometimes I have really tough times choosing an antagonist. And I'm just wondering if at times the way that I should be looking at these archetypes are that the antagonist is the shadow side of whatever hero archetype I've chosen. So like that's just playing out. So it's almost like I'm making a story of like an internal, like I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, like finding the antagonist to be the shadow side of the hero.
Yes, and that's a very good point. We do want in our antagonists some equality of function and ability against the protagonist. Otherwise, you've got Bambi versus Godzilla, and that story doesn't last very long. So yes, they can be, speaking of the archetypes, or let's say the archepaths, you can have them both at the scientist, the middle level of the scientist path, and one of them's on the dark and one's on the light. So you got that. You could put one of them in the middle, the scientist path, and the other one is a magician, still in the middle path. And so they go up against each other because one is all about process, the other is all about performance. They have different goals, and yet they're at the same level. Now, choosing the antagonist is really a tricky thing. I deal with it quite a bit in, a lot, in the Power of the Dark Side book. But it's one of the most challenging aspects of making good writing, is having appropriate antagonists. And also keep in mind, though, the antagonist as a character is only part of it, because there's also the internal problem, the situational problem, the societal, the global, the nature. But yeah, that other individual that you're putting your protagonist up against can be, you can effectively use archetypes by having them on different aspects of the same level in different paths, or let's say one's on the mental side of a path and the other's on the emotional side. And so there'll be conflict there. But yeah, that sense of balance, because once again, you don't put a lightweight in the ring with a heavyweight. I mean, that's just like, well, yeah, duh, Pamela. But I think at times we forget that and we make one of them more powerful or more weak than the other, and then there's no contest. And we'd love to have a world where it isn't all about drama, but we're still in the world that's full of drama and conflict. So we still have to deal with that. But yeah, good question. Yeah. Yes?
What was the theme of, Lady Bird?
The wake-up call.
The wake-up call, right? I thought, I kind of was thinking duty versus desire a little bit.
Well, that's interesting.
Just because of the mom and her expectations of her,
Mhm.
and then her wanting to do her own thing.
That's interesting. The duty versus desire theme, typically I tend to think of it as within one person. But I think what you're saying is you've drawn it such that the mom is about duty and the girl is about desire. And so you've got the duty versus desire theme playing out in two individuals, although they're very close.
I
And
think
they
that's
are
what
physically
I was
related.
mentioning, like having the conflict be like in that same area that antagonists and protagonists are almost the same person, right? Because it's like that's what you're saying is happening
Yeah.
there, duty versus desire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. Somebody should take a note of that. Shall we go ahead and have the drawing because some of you may need to leave? Does everyone have their drawing slip in the yellow bag? Okay, so let's see here. Yes, the drum roll. It's probably. All right. Janelle. Oh, well, all right then. And you have your choice of either of the books there. And other ones are, of course, available should anyone else want to purchase one. And everything's available online as well. Oh, and once again, if you're in the getting on the mailing list for the newsletter, I'm also open to suggestions for topics to cover. So if you see something you think would be something that would be well served by having a mythological approach to it, please feel free to send in newsletter article ideas. I'd be happy to hear from you.
One last question, and that is just,
Sure.
what about the writer as the intuitive, or the writer as almost like the forecaster? Think of like an H.G. Wells, like a Margaret Atwood, Philip K. Dick, where people are critical of their work maybe at first, and then they realize it was a forecast, even unintentional. I guess that's not really a mythic theme because it's about the writer, but I was just wondering if you could talk about just maybe what in just the writer as sort of the forecaster and the criticism they get, and then eventually the public finds out they were right.
Okay, I think what you're describing there is the archepath of the magician. Because remember, the definition of the magician is one who sees patterns that others do not see. And that's what futurists are. That's what those writers who foresee what the next step is going to be if we keep going down this path. Or if you put these things together, this is likely to happen. So it's very much of a magician archepath position. And then going back once again to Newton's law of inertia. When you put new ideas out there, the first thing you get is what? Resistance. That's it, yeah. Or as the Borg would say, resistance is futile. Or as they say in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, if you haven't read the book, it's fabulous. So, yeah, the future, the person who sees the future is typically not believed. Because, here again, other people can't see it. So they think you're crazy. Or you're just intuitively woo-woo. But that's not reality, that's fantasy. Oh, it's a good story, but that could never happen. So that's where I would classify them. Now, as for a particular theme, it could also be under the stealing fire from heaven, because you're bringing something that the group doesn't have, and some people there resist it. And you could also probably have a bit of wake-up call in there, because somebody is actually doing the wake-up call, and we are the people who need to be awakened. But
Is that also Plato's cave? Just the whole idea of like they got out of the cave and they're like, come on, like be free, and they're fighting it. Right? I mean,
yeah,
pretty much.
right. Form resists change. That's just the nature of reality. And yeah, anybody that's trying to prod us out of our comfortable spaces. And we fear change. It's a survival mechanism. We're supposed to fear change. It can kill you. But you're not going to progress unless you make some changes. And those who see it first are often feared, I would say also. Because if that were true, then we might have to change. And what would that be like? So yeah, lonely at the top and lonely at the front. But that's your job as storytellers, is to do that. Well, thank you all so much. I've learned a lot. Thank you. And thanks so much to Film Courage for all that you do. It's wonderful work. And best of luck to all of you. And to keep me posted on what you're working on. I'd like to hear how you're applying these wonderful old classical mythic story tools to what you're doing. And which problems are you addressing? So please do it. I'd be interested in knowing how it all goes. You're very welcome. I enjoyed it. Thanks. Yes. Yeah, I do story consultation and also personal myth consultation, helping people figure out what their path is, what's their archepath, and how best to use it.